stuff for stuff like this. It's like basically going to putting extra barriers to try and be protective, but it's a very edge case that anybody cares. Like if they're on a webinar, they're going to want to chat. So why are you just putting a layer of questions where the consent is more or less given?
Well, sorry,
anyway,
I've given you a problem at the beginning of your webinar.
Don't you always give me problems, Roxy? Always problems. Anyway, welcome everybody. Brainfood live on air, bringing it to you every Friday, no fail. It is episode 289. Would you believe it? 289. And I'm bringing it to you. I am actually in India right now as part of my mega APAC trip. So I realized I won't actually be back in Europe until about May. So I'm going to be traveling around for ages, and I'm going to be visiting as many local recruiter communities as possible. I've just finished the Fiesta 2025 in Bangalore, or Bengaluru as they say over here, and I've got to get this webinar out the way before I join the party on the roof terrace. So I'm going to fly through this in 30 minutes. No, very seriously, I'm going to be enjoying the download with you guys, because we've got a very interesting conversation to be had. Particularly with a lot of the AI agent news that we've been seeing in the last 24 hours. This entire topic is about requirement load, rec load per recruiter. Do we even know what that number is in the era of agentic AI? That's the question, folks. I'm going to be chatting with you all about it. We're going to hopefully throw some ideas out and maybe come up with a framework in terms of how it works. Anyway, let's do some sound checks firstly. I just want to make sure everyone can hear us okay in Crowdcast. If you're watching this in Crowdcast, folks, let me know in the comments whether you can hear me okay. We should be broadcasting this live also in multiple LinkedIns. So if you can see me on LinkedIn, I think we have 100 odd attendees on this on LinkedIn alone. So if you can see me on there, let me know in the comments whether the audio and visual is okay. And we should be ready to go. I think we're doing okay. People seem to be hearing us fine. That's good. Anyway, let's welcome our co-host for the day, Oksana Strifatov. Oksana, great to see you. People who may not know, but you and I are all colleagues back in the day. In fact, you probably know me. You've probably known me longer than most Brainfooders have. Because tell us when we.
Yeah, and I can confirm to those of you who know Hung from his, as I call it, influencer career in talent acquisition. I can confirm he actually used to be a recruiter back in the day. He used to sit on the same permanent recruitment desk back in my agency days at Cyber Team. So. Yeah, we go back, 17, 18 years?
Don't even say. You're aging us both. You're aging us both here, Roxy. But yes, I have indeed done the job before, back in the day. So thanks for the credibility boost, Roxy. Actually, why don't you introduce yourself? I mean, you're an ex-colleague, but what have you been doing recently? What's going on?
Sure. So currently looking for my next gig, but most recently I spent a couple of years at MangoPay, a French payment scale-up. And yeah, overall I've got about 15, 17 years of experience. The past 7 years or so have been particularly in the fintech space. My career as a, I guess, individual contributor has always been tech. So yeah, there's been a blend of tech and fintech in my career. And yeah, thank you so much for the invite. Pumped to share the stage with you. And yeah, obviously interesting the discussion ahead of us. So yeah, really keen to hear our guests' thoughts on the hot topic of AI and volume hiring.
Indeed, and I'm going to ask you that question as well. Very interesting for us to figure out. But before we continue, folks, we have to say thanks to our sponsors, because every single week, no fail, really rock solid for our 4.5 years. I can't believe it. But every week, somebody steps up. Somebody in our recruitment tech community steps up and says, yes, Hung, I want to sponsor this episode. And this week, our wonderful sponsors are, of course, one of the leading recruitment technology optimization tools out there. It is BrightHire, folks. If you don't know about sort of interview intelligence, operational efficiency, If you're not caring about any of those things, you really need to pay attention to something like Bright Hire. They're an organization that started off really as an interview kind of transcription and note-taking type of tool before they've kind of just really expanded scope to become an optimization tool for anybody who's in the recruiting space. It's going to help. I think it's one of those categories where once you use it, you definitely know you got to have it. So if you haven't got one of those tools yet, which basically helps you get rid of the interview note kind of process, but there's so much more, such as give you intelligence as to what's going on with interviews, help your hiring managers understand sort of where they're getting, where they need training, figuring out sort of how your interview quality is, what your interview capacity is, etc., etc. You definitely need one of these tools. Bright Hire is one of the best. I'm going to share a link with you in the chat stream and make sure you check it out. Okay, cool. Great guys, by the way, always pumping out new innovation, new products as well. All right, let's get on with this. Let's actually review the newsletter before we get any further. Did you read it last week, Oxy? And if so, what was interesting for you?
I did. And yeah, as always, packed with lots of thought-provoking insights and content. I think for me, it was actually connected to the topic of AI, believe it or not. And what sparked my interest was your prediction number 11, around what was it? Decentralization of talent acquisition to hiring managers. So my thoughts, I'm not sure I agree with your prediction. Sorry to throw the spanner in the works, but I guess you like a bit of a debate, as far as I know, Johan. So what I was thinking, actually, and I was trying to find some stats on this, and I couldn't. So maybe interesting to do some statistics on this. But in my experience working in recruitment, I don't think I've come across a hiring manager who likes recruiting. And if there are few, they are rare breed. Most hiring managers actually hate recruiting. Probably a bit of a strong word to say, but yeah, generally in my experience, hiring managers don't want to recruit, don't like it, and avoid it by all cost. Admittedly, recruiters, we could be the part of the problem, but I think ultimately thinking about the topic, I think it's more to do with the fact that, if you look at engineering, for example, so my background is tech, so I always like talking about engineering managers and sort of tech hiring managers. They want to be doing coding, they want to be delivering projects, they want to be releasing new products. They really don't like spending time interviewing people, looking at CVs, and of course, yes, AI, and this is what we're talking about here today, but obviously this was in the context of if AI takes off and all these different tools can replace us as recruiters, so hiring managers will be the ones taking the responsibility. I think the huge value that we bring is actually the influencing part. I've seen so many hiring managers who, drag their feet writing job descriptions. And even with ChatGPT, I mean, it's so easy these days to write a job description. They still deprioritize that on the top of their list. And why do they do it? One, because it's painful. Recruiting is painful. But two, also, they don't like doing it. So ultimately, as humans, I think we always gravitate towards things that we enjoy and like doing most, versus the things that we find tedious or we put it off. So ultimately, that's my kind of take on your on your prediction. And I think even if they're pushed, because obviously we're talking about do more with less. So I think even if they pushed to take on that kind of recruiter role, predominantly with the use of AI, is the outcome going to be a positive one? Is the quality of recruiting going to be there? Is the candidate experience going to be there? I don't think so. So yeah, we may see a push for that. But my feeling is that the ones that will be asked by their organizations to take on more of an active role in recruiting will ultimately go out to agencies and some find some form of default. It's so easy to find to dismiss like a notification, an email. It's much harder to dismiss a human or ignore a human. So I think we still bring that human touch. So yeah, that's my take.
No, really interesting. And I think you're right. There is a case that, it's rare to, I'm just casting my own memory back, like who really enjoys or embraces the hiring side? Some people do. Ed just mentioned in the chat there that,
Yeah.
yes, he enjoys sort of doing the hiring, and I think that's totally fair. But probably, and Jeremy mentioned very interesting as well, if it's not tied to a hiring manager's KPIs, then they're not going to be interested in it. So it's a lot of incentives
Exactly.
need to be aligned to it.
I
But you can imagine
agree.
there will be some kind of, I don't know, I just think the tools will obviously change. Here's one theory I'm kind of dreaming up. Essentially, prior to digitization, hiring managers did do a lot of the recruiting because it was just HR manager, HR personnel pushing an advert out and then just feeding CVs to the hiring managers, and that was it. But when basically the internet occurred, suddenly it was easier for companies to start building databases of candidates, and then suddenly we came along because we were like, directly hiring, and it was cheaper to do it than agency and so on. I just wonder whether AI may give, it depends on who is the user for AI. Is it going to be recruiters or is it going to be hiring managers? And depending on who's more innovative there, we'll see sort of those things happen. But interesting to see how that works. By the way, this is probably a chat we're going to do on Brainfood Lab at some point. Decentralized, is it right to call it decentralized hiring or, centralized hiring? Some companies have inherently done it. I think Mark has mentioned Komoot. I think Blinkist, very famously in Berlin, basically don't have a very light TA team. Hiring managers do a lot there. But most have kind of created a separate TA function to deliver that. Very, very interesting. Roxy, I'm kind of aware of time, so we might just need to plow into our conversations. Let's switch it to Reclo.
Let's do it.
Before we bring on our guest, right? Let's ask you the question, because I think you did sort of reply to me with very succinct data as well, that you were very comfortable to give me numbers, which is great. How have you calculated the requirements load when you were leading a team, department, and so on? And how do you feel that, with the innovations that are happening over even the last 3-6 months, how do you feel that might change the way in which you put those numbers? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll caveat that maybe with the fact that actually we didn't use, or I wasn't lucky to have enough budget to use many AI tools. I mean, we used ChatGPT. So here's a caveat from my perspective that actually perhaps, my experience hasn't been leveraging as much AI as some of the other people here on the call. But my take has always been, and especially in my industry, in kind of product companies and fintechs, looking at tech and product separately versus non-tech and product, where typically the hiring has been easier. We've been relying more on advertising, for example, whereas typically tech and product require much more outreach, sourcing, and so on and so forth. So in terms of recruiter workload, I would say my expectation to maybe switch it over. I would expect 2-3 hires per month from a tech recruiter versus up to 5 from a non-tech recruiter. So that would be my starting point, and that would probably translate to up to 10 recs per tech and product recruiter versus up to 15 for non-tech and product. Plus also, taking into consideration within engineering, sometimes you get multiple kind of headcount requisitions. So your kind of evergreen engineering roles. So yeah, that's my kind of take on it.
Two really interesting things you mentioned, Oxy. I want to just say, just to underline this, so I've got it clear in my own mind. Firstly, you got to look at the difficulty of the role. So you can't just treat a position as like, a position is the same as a position. No, what is the difficulty of the role? And you can bucket it in big categories like tech and non-tech. But ultimately, you need to have that sort of division. Yeah, absolutely. And secondly, and that's related to how you interact with them. So the inbound or the outbound, like what is the technique to source
Exactly.
that makes a difference?
And
Yeah,
I used to actually, I took it to maybe the next level, you would say, because at times where we had high volume of requisitions coming in, peaks of demand, we actually categorize those positions. I asked my recruiters to categorize, okay, this role, you know, in a scale of 1 to 3, keep it simple. Yeah, you can rely on advertising. It's an easy job to fill. Doesn't require sourcing. So we would use this sort of 3 kind of number category to then divide the workload between the recruiters. So effectively, you know, no one given recruiter was loaded with the most tricky positions requiring sourcing, and then someone else was working on just easy to fill inbound kind of requisitions.
Yeah, really good. So some sort of grading system is going to be useful, and you map that grading system to probably whether you needed to do sourcing, because sourcing, at least previously, was a very heavy and intensive part of the work because it's actually unpredictable. Like you can't predict your resourcing commitments with sourcing.
Yeah.
Because you might get lucky, like the first page result, and there might be the person right there, or it could take you forever to actually find the person. So sourcing is one of those where you just don't know how much commitment's required. So, okay, that's really good. We've got rules of thumb here, folks. Quick question for you in the crowd if you're watching this. Do you grade the roles in terms of difficulty? How do you use it? Is it like a color code, or do you use the 1 to 3 system? Is it 1 to 5 system? How do you do it? Let's share some information in there. Let us know in the comments how you grade the difficulty of the positions. Okay, cool. Let's bring on some of our guests. We'll have a look-see and see what they think about it. Jeremy, I'll bring you on at the very end because I want to get your view on the data side. But we're going to bring on who we're going to bring on. Have we even found them? We've got Mark here. Let's see if I can search for them. Might need to do a bit. Here we go. Mark's here. Let's get him on. Got Mary Kay here, actually. How's Mary Kay doing? Yeah, she's here. Great. Let's bring Mary Kay on. And I believe Matthias is here as well. Let's see whether Matthias is here. There's Matthias without his second name. I assume that's Matthias Schmieser. If not, then, you know, any Matthias will do. Just come on. Oh, there's Mark. Mark, how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm just figuring out why my camera is doing weird stuff.
It's because there you go. The real Mark is here. And Mary Kay is here as well. Let's do some intros while Matthias is coming on. Mark, let's go with you first. Who are you? What is you do?
I'm Mark Deubel. I work at Synthesia as one of their TA leaders. So I'm quite in the AI space at the moment, and I'm an avid AI opponent and fan at the same time.
Fantastic stuff. And if you don't know Synthesia, by the way, they're a really interesting kind of digital avatar type technology, text to video style. Hung Lee is being trained as we speak. So we'll see some of that sort of abomination coming at you soon enough. Okay, I've shared the, right, Matthias needs an invite. Let's do that again. He's on auto reject. That's probably his problem. Right, here's Mary Kay. Mary Kay, why don't you quickly introduce yourself? Who are you? What did you do?
Hello, Mary Kay Baldino. So I am in the Chicago area. I just recently, as in I'm wrapping up week 3 at a new job. I joined Morningstar, and we are a global investment advisory firm, and I lead global talent acquisition.
Fantastic stuff. Great to see you here, Mary Kay. And I need to thank you, by the way, because I got a flood of like Morningstar subscribers coming in. I thought, you know what?
Excellent.
Mary Kay's rolled out the 3-line whip saying, sign up to this or be fired. So thank you for your pressure. Okay, we've got Matthias on. Matthias, can you hear us?
Yeah.
Yes, great. Matthias, can you quickly introduce yourself?
Can you hear me?
Who are you? Yes, you're good.
Perfect. My name is Matthias. I'm a Senior Director of Talent at Amplify, and yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, great to see everybody here. Okay, we've heard a little bit about sort of how Oksana has done the requirements load. I think that's a very good kind of rule of way to do it. Is there any other techniques? Like, what is the calculation you go to? So let's start with baseline, actually. How do we calculate sort of the rec load per capita per recruiter? How do we divide that? And then what is happening as sort of with this artificial intelligence and this increase of productivity we're meant to be getting? If we assume the productivity gains are true, how does that then inform our calculation? So let's go, Mary Kay, let's go with you first. Sure. In your experience, how have you generally organized requirements? How have you done that analysis?
Yeah, so this for me, it starts with volume. What is the scale of your recruiting team, right? Do you have a large global team that's geographically dispersed? Are you in a startup where you have very limited resources? So scale absolutely matters, because a recruiter is going to be handling all requisitions in a location and have to be able to recruit for, let's say up to 15 different disciplines and levels, et cetera, at a time, is going to be able to handle a much smaller workload effectively than somebody who is recruiting for, one or two more specialized positions where they work with that business group all the time and they know those jobs inside and out. So scale absolutely is the most important factor when I'm looking at these kind of models. And then I do think, the sort of general recruitment philosophy, which is often driven by skill, but do you have, clear alignments to certain hiring groups, and you have the recruiters able to build really deep relationships and get really specialized knowledge of their talent needs? Or do you need generalist recruiters who can flex and be really agile and can recruit for anything at any time? Those are very different sort of recruitment philosophies and models. And again, I think they tie to scale, but when you got to answer some of those baseline questions first, before you can even start to get into calculations. And I always start with historically looking at historical data to understand what has recruiter productivity been, how many hires of what kinds, what levels, what kind of specialization. So using the data to establish historical baselines. And then it's a lot of process stuff too, right? So are your processes in a place where you can automate and use AI to strip away a lot of the administrative burden? I think note taking is a great example. So is automating interview scheduling. So all of those kind of things become really important, understanding how much improvement is possible. So if you're just starting on an AI journey, you have a lot of efficiency gains and you have a lot of work that you're going to be able right? Recruiter time, wasted time really in this day of AI that you can recapture and reinvest in either more value add or eliminate, some of the lower level positions where they were primarily just pushing CVs around.
Really, really good monologue there, Mary Kay. A couple of things I want to pull out. Right? No, monologue is good.
Yep.
I like lectures.
I'm on the stage. Yeah.
So the first thing I think was sort of educational for me was the diversity of role. And Roxana, you kind of made some sort of intuition to that to a degree as well. Like, how diverse are you spreading the recruiter across different roles? Because if you're doing a episodic role that is not a repeat role, you're going to build a load of skills there, and then it's not useful for the other role that you're recruiting for. So it's actually like lots of extra work. It's not just one sort of unit of extra work. It's lots more because you're starting from scratch there. So there's probably an equation to that, isn't there? How many unique roles or how many roles that you can't repeat that you recruit, that actually determines how many recs that you should be handling. So that's a really important point. And yeah, sort of the idea of the maturation of the business. So where are you with sort of the current state? Are you sort of and this relates again, I think it dovetails into the structure of your current recruiting team as well. Like, how many people have you got? Because if there's only one person or a very small team, you don't have the option of saying, I don't do that. You don't
exactly.
say I'm a tech recruiter. You have to do it. You have to recruit for that role. Very interesting. Okay, and you said loads more, but I want to move to Matthias's view to get his perception of it, because I think your journey at Emnify is very interesting as well, wasn't it, Matthias? So weren't you quite early in coming in and building sort of the team TA team, right? So how did you calculate sort of the distribution of recs to these new people you're bringing in?
Yeah, so I'm very obsessed with candidate experience, which means that for me, honestly speaking, when I started my recruiter career, I had like those 20 to 25 recs and, got flooded with applications, and it was almost impossible to handle, 100 to 150 active candidates at the same time. So back in the days, what I'm doing at the minute is I really make sure that my people do not have more than 5 to 6 recs per recruiter, which seems to be less. But again, I think think a little bit about your maturity of the business, which was that, but also employer branding wise, right? So, I mean, this correlates a little bit into this picture is if you do not have a brand, you're not aware, like in the best case, people who are in the same industry know your company, but beyond that industry, you are not really present, then this really becomes a challenge here. And I think here it's a little bit about you need a different approach for senior roles, for example, right? We talked about diversity of roles. So if you have a leadership role or an executive search, right, this could take 6 to 9 months or even 12 months sometimes, and just having one role, right? So you need to look at what kind of roles do my recruiter have and how long or how fast does it take the turnaround, right? And then I'm always a big fan of re-engineering or re-engineering the process in terms of, hey, I need 3 final candidates to have a confidence to then say in the final round, okay, one of them will make it. And then if I need 3, what are my pass-through rates, or conversion rates in that sense to build then a pipeline? And I do think that most of the time people tend to say, look, I love everyone, and I give 50% of the application review a pass. This is not going to work. This is not going to scale, right? So you rather need to be very strict and have a clear idea of what you want. And therefore, I love the AI topic. Again, we are working with MetaView to reduce the amount of administrative work in scorecards, right? How long does it take to write scorecards? If you even write good scorecards, this is then going back to feedback, right? Can I give people proper feedback? Can I create an experience where there's a learning opportunity, right, for both sides? And I think this is crucial. And I rather focus on the people or my recruiters to say, you focus on this, you have time there, because then you can give more quality feedback, which is very rare in organizations and recruitment processes these days. And that will move the needle for us.
Okay, really interesting. Again, Matthias, I want to touch on this topic of employer brand you mentioned, because I think most people would also agree, 4 per recruiter sounds low, right? It's like the average is probably like in the 10 to 12 type mark, just as a thumb in the air type of thing. But you're saying, actually, I can reduce the number because I want to improve the experience of the candidate, because particularly the employer branding is important in the current state. So here's a question for the panel. Actually, everyone going to push into this. Even if you're watching this in the crowd, does it mean to say if you have a very strong employer brand, you can load your recruiters with more recs because you care less about candidate experience? And I know we all need to care, but basically you can burn it a little bit more because you're Google, right? Let's face it, that's what Google do. It's like they force you into like 18 interviews. It's a long process. Doesn't matter because they've got a massive employer brand. They're going to keep on getting inbound. If you're a scrappy startup finding a way for that same talent, it actually means that you need to do less recs to your recruiters because they need to spend more time per candidate. What are your thoughts on that? Sorry to be provocational, folks, but I just want to throw out there. It just seems to me those things map. Mark, you're shaking your head aggressively, so come on, what's your view?
It happens. I do not agree. Let's say it that way. I think no matter how big or how good your brand is, you should care at the same level. The problem is that at the bigger brands, they just don't see that moment in time where you say, okay, this is where a candidate gets a crappy experience. They always find out afterwards when it goes on, because that's the downside of a big brand, right? It goes on TikTok or it goes somewhere else, and suddenly your brand is trashed. So there's a massive risk in taking that approach for companies. And I do agree with Matthias that less active recs actually improves the quality much and much more. But there is a very fine balance.
Very interesting. Thoughts on the branding side. It's not that I want this to happen, by the way. It's not like I didn't neglect employer brand. I'm just thinking, okay, if you had to do a trade-off, you could probably pressure the recruiters a little bit more and say, okay, average is 10, you could probably do 20 because you're Google. And which means that basically your ability to get a conversion on the screen is probably easier. You're going to get more inbound. People are going to agree to do your assessment a bit more. So even that is going to take less time. So it means that time per candidate can be lower because your employer brand's so powerful. Thoughts on this, America? You got an idea?
I don't think having millions of inbound is necessarily a good thing. Jeremy Thornton just put a question in there. What do you do with 7 million applicants a year? It's a nightmare actually in terms of how do you sift through to get the quality, and I don't think AI is quite there yet in terms of doing anything beyond like a really high level initial screen and just knocking out a lot of the truly unqualified people. I think it'll get there, but I haven't seen a use case where it's actually doing all of the resume sifting that recruiters are still burdened with in those kind of really high volume applicant. I do think that there is a huge impact of brand. I love working on employer value proposition, employer brand projects because most companies aren't a household name. There are so many companies out there, and there's a tiny fraction of them that are a household name. So you have to focus, I think, on how are you branding your job opportunities, because that's the first thing that candidates see when you are not a household name. And I think we spend far too little time working on really having amazing job posting content, especially video job posting content, getting your hiring managers on video, really talking about the realities of the job, giving people selling points. You need to really analyze who are we trying to talk to and what do they care about, and do we have a message with proof points that we can share with them so that they would choose our job over our competitors. And if you haven't gone through that thought process, then you probably don't have a compelling job brand, right? So, and I think that investing in job brand pays off 10 times more than investing in
a
what?
I want to say this real quick, because I think the branding issue is really important. And the way the reverse thinking of this is that if you do an analysis on your current brand, and you recognize that it is a normal company, it's not like a marquee name, that has to be factored into the volume of recs that you can actually give per recruiter, because it means that you can't overload them. So the reverse of what the less provocative way of saying it is, the weaker the brand, the less roles you can actually give to your recruiters, because they actually have to spend more time per candidate. And that's worth believing in, at least factoring in. Mary Kay, you did talk about putting effort into telling the brand story. Going to you, Mark, particularly using Synthesia itself to try and of course, we're not going to talk about sort of employer branding, particularly in the show, but there is time commitment required to get the hiring managers to get involved with the videos and stuff like this. So do you factor that in when you're thinking about rec load as well? Like you think, okay, actually, when we launch a particular project, we need all of these elements in place. Therefore, we can't actually have 100 recs like that. Per recruiter is going to be less.
It really depends on the rec complexity. I look at, okay, so how hard is it to find a person for that domain? So say you have a rec for a very niche machine learning engineer. Does it warrant actual time for my hiring manager? Does it warrant my time to actually record a video? Now, I used to do them by hand. Now it's a little bit easier, right? Automated, but still it takes time. Do you do it for high volume roles? Does it make sense? So there is a strategy behind looking at, okay, where do we actually need it? And what I typically do is actually look at historical data. Okay, how much time do we actually need to get the right people in, to get the right attraction? But also, what was the conversion rate from outreach, right, from sourcing? that people actually respond fairly quickly, or do we need to put extra effort in? And only then I will be using video. In my case, I'm using video a lot. But typically, for most people in TI, I would say, yeah, determine, okay, is this a niche role? Is this a very tough role? Or the other side, is this a high volume role that you never have to record it again and just get it in there, right? So there are a lot of things that are playing with it. It's not a simple black and white decision.
How do we map this to KPIs, folks? So let's say we've allocated the rec load per recruiter, but the numbers don't necessarily mean the same thing. Like in the sense that, 555 per recruiter. Let's say one poor guy has inherited the hardest type of opportunities for whatever reason. How do we measure the performance against all of this? Do we have an individuated performance, or do we have a standard? All recruiters need to be doing 2 hires per month and stuff like this. What's your experience of doing that? How does it work if you vary it per individual? Like, do you get pushback from team members saying, hey, why am I getting just like this? And I want to standardize. So in other words, standardization or personalization on KPIs based on difficulty of role. What are your thoughts on this? Anybody can come in to put a view on that.
I've honestly been used. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Mary Kay.
I was going to say, I look for continuous improvement, not a sort of generic KPI. I like measuring whether or not recruiters' productivity has been improving. Are they learning to use the tools better to make themselves more efficient? Are they developing their skills and getting better at kickoff meetings, which has a huge impact on how productive they can be? Are they refining their sourcing skills so that they are getting faster replies, as Mark was talking about, that kind of thing? So improvement in terms of productivity is more meaningful and is more individualized than just saying, well, you have to have this many hires a week or a month or whatever. Recruiters also don't control their workloads, and in a lot of organizations there's no workforce planning, and so they never really know what to expect. There's no sort of information about what's coming down the pipeline that's reliable or accurate in a lot of companies. So, if your organization's really weak at workforce planning, then you may have extremely variable workloads through the year. So how do you say, here's this generic KPI they have to meet monthly?
Yeah, really, really interesting. I think I would like to work for Mary Kay if I was back in recruiting. I want the continuous improvement, because I might be starting from a very low. I don't know where my floor is. Yeah,
we'd have to talk about that.
Yeah, we do indeed. Okay, anybody else with thoughts on this? How do we sort of measure performance after the role allocation?
It's a combination. So I'm not a fan of KPIs. I'm definitely not a. The reason why is because it really depends again on the role, right? Some people can handle 5 roles, but they're very niche. Some people have 15 roles because they're high level, super easy. Let's say support engineers, right? So you can't basically say, okay, we're going to level every recruiter out. Then it also depends on, is it a unique role, repetitive, size of the talent pool, the location, the complexity, the seniority of the role. There are so many things that come into determining rec load. I've always been in very niche roles, so I'm used to 5 to 6, but in the past I've had 25 or 26 or maybe even 45 because it was a little bit easier. So setting KPIs overall doesn't work, in my opinion. And when you look at recruiter per recruiter, I rather measure the candidate experience, but also the hiring manager experience than just the amount of hires. The business needs the hires, that's a given. But I don't think that somebody that pushes out 100 outreaches a week is better than somebody that actually gets 5 out, but those 5 respond and they respond well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, some really interesting feedback. Matthias, you want to come in a bit? I'll come to you in a sec. But Ben in the chat has said something really interesting. Candidate, hiring manager satisfaction, very, very important. They need to be brought in as part of the equation when you're doing calculation of requirement load, right? Because you can imagine if you're absorbing or you're asking your recruiters to do too many requirements, obviously the candidate experience is going to go down, the hiring manager experience is going to go down, simply because you're going to have less time with all of those folks. In which case, the hiring managers need to be aware of this, so that they know, hey, listen, if you want to push all these recs on, we're going to absorb it. We're going to help the company. But do bear in mind that your experience of this is going to be getting down. You're going to go worse. Like, you're in it with us. You know, you can't expect us to white glove everything if you're shoving all this at us. And this is not like passive aggressive. It's just like an equation. Got limited resourcing, you know, etc. Matthias, I think you wanted to come in and say something. So didn't want to interrupt you. So sorry, go ahead.
No, all good. I think it's good to look at hiring managers in this equation here, but not so much on their satisfaction, more on their maturity, right? Because you have a hiring maturity model, I think, that's out there. This is super important. So how much hand-holding do they need, right? Do they know what they need to do? Have they done this before? Is this a new leader in the role? Is this maybe not so much of a good people leader, and he needs a little bit more of an understanding because they don't know what they were looking for, maybe, right? Do they understand the skill dimension of the team, right? Are there skill gaps, or is this a role that, or are we trying to gain knowledge that does not exist in the company, right? So I think looking at hiring managers and the maturity level they have, or the hiring culture in general, is key also to look into this. This has for us been always something. For example, let's say you want to hire a director and your hiring manager is a C-level person. This person might have other things to do. Going back to Oxy's comment earlier, right? I do think then this person cannot respond as fast and as much as maybe a director or somebody else, right? Because they have other stuff to do. They have to build strategy. They have to talk to customers. They have to, you know, be on conferences or whatsoever. Now, this goes back to the good old saying of, is hiring priority or not, right? And what does it mean if hiring is a priority? And can I move internal meetings, or do I just have these 1 or 2 hours with people and I need to do the most out of it, right? So this is where it all starts and ends, I think, in terms of how much do you really value hiring and what is the return on investment? And do you actually understand that this is maybe for startup and scale up an opportunity to raise the bar, while for others, this is just another bump in the seat?
Okay, I want to interrupt because you have finished, haven't you, Matthias? So I actually timed it I'm timing my intervention correctly. Really, really interesting about hiring manager maturity. And this is not to judge hiring managers, but very, very obviously, if you're a first-time hirer, you're going to need more support, and your ability to give feedback quickly, your intake meetings, all of that's going to actually influence whether you're going to be able to communicate effective information to the recruiting team. Therefore, that influences the amount of requirements that you know, the volume of requirements. The immature hiring manager with lots of requirements is going to take the recruiting team a lot of time to fill, I would say. So that's something to think about.
And if I may add there as well, because to me, what springs to mind is really hiring manager engagement levels, because we talk about satisfaction, okay, how happy they are, but let's not forget that actually it's their responsibility to do the hiring, as in, you know, bring the people into their team, whether to support them, bring the expertise, but really for me, it's always been about developing the engagement of the hiring team. So really, they feel more responsible for the hiring decisions, and therefore, you know, that translates into response times, quality of feedback, and really better collaboration between TA and hiring managers, where they don't just see us as servicing their needs and almost, you know, the outsourcing of their hiring, but really a true partner. So for me, it's also about the engagement. And as recruiters, I mean, in my experience, my recruitment teams have always been, you know, almost gravitating towards the more engaged hiring managers, because of course it's easier, you can quick fill the jobs quicker, versus the hiring managers that are disengaged, never respond to you, have to waste your time chasing for feedback. And, you know, okay, this is not only is the role really difficult, but also the hiring managers are disengaged. So really, I would put more work into engaging and really educating the hiring managers. And that ultimately is going to translate into their hiring manager satisfaction. So, and that's ultimately where we can bring the value as well as hiring experts.
No, it's a really good point, and we do like naturally gravitate to hiring managers that are more into it, right? And that's something that probably the business needs to be a little bit more aware of. It's not like we're human beings; you can't not sort of move in this way. By the way, we've just had a recruiter here. bounced from the event. So obviously low priority there with Nathan disappearing. Come on, mate. What's going on? Cancel that meeting, man. No. What's interesting? Just a point that actually Matthias mentioned. Like, there's also like how serious are you per role? Like, how? And let's be fair. Certain requirements are more important than others. Some are critical needs. You need them now. Others are. You know what? We really, really would like to have these people, but we can survive without. And how do you measure that? Because every manager is going to say, of course, we need it today, but can you cancel a meeting in order to schedule an interview is a very good way to kind of qualify how important that event is or how important that requirement is. The hiring manager says, no, that's great. Don't worry. You can mark that role down a little bit. I think that's fair. If you have it officially locked in, that's a fair way to do it. Okay. Moving forward, because we have to fly through this, and this has been a great conversation so far. We could have 3 hours to it, but we don't. Let's think about where we are with artificial intelligence. I don't want to mention any product per se, but I do want to have a look at, obviously, AI is chomping into different parts of the work. I don't know whether anybody saw OpenAI drop operator in the last 24 hours, and my sort of personal news feed, sort of my WhatsApp just blew up. Everyone's going, oh my God, it's like completely changing everything. So I'm just saying, okay, how do we calculate everything we've said now that we have this kind of ongoing series of technological innovation? How do we even like apply a requirement load to a recruiter these days? Do we I don't know how we even do this. Is it even feasible? What are your thoughts? How does AI change the rec load per recruiter? What's our mechanism for putting that number to be realistic?
Well, I think you kind of have to set expectations. And for me, it's less about managing the recruiters than it is about understanding where I need to step in and shift my resource strategy. So do I need to outsource some of the work to an RPO partner or a search firm because my team is overloaded? And so knowing when to shift the resource strategy is more important in monitoring those workloads and how requisitions are being assigned and where things are at. So, I've had to create Power BI dashboards because applicant tracking systems are typically not great at helping manage this, but you can build all these factors into a Power BI type of dashboard where you're able to in real time see, exactly how everyone's workload is balanced. And I have assigned like red, yellow, green scorecarding to that kind of thing. And that's what I have used to go, okay, everyone's too overloaded. We've got 20 more requisitions coming for these kind of roles. What's the strategy here, and how are we going to address that? You can't always just go out and get more headcount.
Yeah, and you've introduced a really interesting thought which I didn't have before, which is where are you with the role? Like we're assuming That's the right. Recs are all like at the start, but they're not going to be. There's going to be half a dozen that you're halfway there, you nearly close. Like, can you then absorb more? You probably could.
Yes.
So yeah, very, very interesting. Okay, go to you, Matthias. How are you thinking about rec load distribution with AI? A CEO or CFO is going to say, of course, your recruiters can do more per requirement. We've just spent X amount of money on this tool, which is meant to make you more productive. Is that fair statement? If so, okay, what is the number? If it's not fair statement, what are you going to do about it? What's your policy here?
Yeah, I would say it will, of course, enable people to take more than they used to, because we reduce the time of research, for example, right? You can get pretty decently prepared into a kickoff meeting by, doing your ChatGPT thing, or even trying to come up, having the job description already and looking at technical assessments and so on, or next steps, or certain pools, certain countries. So you come prepared, and I think this will then end up into the alignment is there faster than it's used to. And then you can pick up and speak the same language with your hiring manager much faster than you used to. But then also from an operational standpoint, when it comes to scorecards or like interviews, but also when it comes to top funnel, right? Because I think the most time, let's assume they're not sourcing, the most time you can save in recruitment is the top funnel. So if you master this, then a lot of time, a lot of work. I mean, we see this with the markets, right? It's either a lot of amount of sourcing you need to do, or it's a lot of screening that you need to do. Because to be fair, employer branding is broken on the most of the organizations, because quality per hire here, I would say, how many applications do I need in order to have a proper interview? That is something I would look at in order to say, okay, how do we balance this? But I do tend to say, I would say another 1 or 2 roles would be capable or possible without AI versus with AI. Yeah. But of course, it depends again on which kind of roles. Like, is this another 1 or 2 engineers? Sure. Maybe even 3, right? Is this another 2 leadership roles? Maybe not, right? So that is maybe something we need to consider here. But honestly, I would say if people are used to work with AI and have this already built in their day-to-day, definitely possible.
Very good, Matthias. I'll come to you in a sec, Mark, but I want to ask the crowd very briefly. Has anybody got any experience of pressure to increase the rec load having spent something on a productivity tool? Like have you gone and did you have to promise increased workload in order to secure that particular tool, for instance? If so, let me know in the comments, what was that situation? How did you negotiate this? And yeah, how do you manage morale of team and so on? Mark Dubel, let's say I've got a whiz-bang new sort of tool that's going to improve my productivity by 50% per recruiter, apparently. What do? Do I cut down the number of recruiters? Do I use the 50% saving on improving candidate experience? Do I absorb more requirements per recruiter? What's the policy there? How's your approach?
Fire them all. No, just kidding. I actually think that we have an opportunity here, a massive opportunity. We could choose to overwhelm our recruiters again with more rec load. Let's add more and more to the game. And making the run at 100% more, we can add a few more recs. That might be the solution, but still within reason. But we've been running on let's do more with less for years, right? Is it necessary to? Does it serve TA already? As we have a bad reputation, the employee branding, the candidate experience. We never had time to fix it. So if we choose to actually leverage this moment and make our teams better by letting them keep their time gains, they can actually spend that time on a multitude of things to improve the results. So better sourcing instead of spray and pray, better personalization, better relationships with hiring managers, time for video, time for other niche ways to reach out to people. Yeah. For now, we've always been just managing and running after the facts. But what if we can actually be a better partner? And the beautiful thing is that our ROI, that investment that you will actually be bringing, because it's an investment, right? Because you could do more thanks to AI. But that ROI will actually be surprising. I've been doing this for a few years now. I've been spending 10 to 20% of my time every week on just improving myself because I'm using those tools. I'm having note takers. I'm using Stilper filters, those kind of things. My sourcing is automated. So my hope is that TA leaders will actually take that time gain approach, share their results openly, and influence other leaders, because this is a choice that we're going to make. Are we going to make the same mistake as ever before, or are we going to actually do something new?
Really important point. Yeah, I think round of digital. What are we going to do with the time saved, folks? You got to ask yourself that question. We just deploy these new tools, whatever. Sometimes these tools are simply going to be rolled into you, whether you want them or not. What are you going to do with the time saved? Are you going to sit there and just accept more recs? You could do that as one choice. Maybe you accept some increase of requirement, or do you do like a big restructure? Take the opportunity to actually fix some of those long, sort of deeper problems that takes time to fix. Or are you going to look at different measures of success for the department, such as improving candidate experience, for instance, such as improving hiring manager experience? We haven't even talked about DE&I. DE&I, by the way, takes more time. It's one of those things we knew it's going to take more time if you want to build a diverse pipeline. Well, guess what? You've just got more time with this technology. So can you not argue the case back into the management? You kind of got to do that.
And to be fair, we spoke about this recently together. But I think I'm going to borrow your way of saying it, the human premium. Thanks to AI, we can actually bring human premium. It's actually a tool to become more human again. If you use it in the right spaces, we can actually be what we should be, right? Talking with people, updating them, giving them feedback, all those kind of things. So it will actually allow us to be human.
Yeah. It's about value add, right? So I come from a Lean Six Sigma background, and the when you're doing real process improvement work, the goal is never to just how do we drive down waste in order to eliminate people. The goal of doing that kind of process improvement work is really how do we drive down waste so that we are focusing all of our efforts on the value add. And so that's I loved what Mark said, because that's exactly how I think about it. It is how do we use that time back and reinvest it in the things that really matter and really make a difference to our organization, driving up quality of hire, quality of people's experiences, better fit, better coaching even for hiring managers and interviewers.
100%. And sorry, Roxy, we are going to probably need to do a show on this. Like, how do we make the case? Because it's not the obvious case as far as the business sees it, I think. So the business will see it, oh, great, we've just increased productivity of this team. That means we can do more with less, which means like getting rid of a few recruiters, right? And then we're back to having that scrambling, trying to crisis manage every single day, that type of experience, which is not, it should never have been business as usual. We've kind of accepted crisis as business as usual. That's not good. And it'd be useful to try and think, okay, how do we make the business case? And folks, we're going to have to make that business case now, because we've got 5 minutes to go. I want to bring on Jeremy Thornton, because he is a person that apparently knows how to do this. Not to say our panelists don't, but I don't want to burn any more of the time from our wonderful guys that are basically donated their time to have this conversation. So I've got to say goodbye to Mark Dubel. Great to see you, sir. Great to see you, Mary Kay, as well. Matthias, I'll say goodbye to you here also. And Oksana, I know you got to go. You got to pick the kids up. So thank you so much for joining and co-hosting with me. But what I will do is I'll bring on Jeremy here, and then we'll finish the show with some kind of like analytical, sort of data-driven way of having this resolved. So invite to the main stage, Jeremy Thornton, come on down. I don't know why that blank space continues. I think it's probably because someone bounced off. But folks, hasn't this been a fascinating conversation so far? Really interesting and important. Firstly, how do you calculate the requirement load? Obviously much more complicated than I thought. But increasingly, the influence of artificial intelligence, we can shape what that means for us. Doesn't have to be, going back to the non-equilibrium of simply scrambling around. Jeremy Thornton, good to see you, sir. Why don't you quickly introduce yourself? Who are you? What is you do?
Hi, so I'm Jeremy. I've been in TA for about 20 years now. Initially ran a agency, then about 10 years ago moved into the world of data. Last, I suppose, commercial role, I built City's first global TA reporting platform across 150 countries, 7 million applicants per year. At its peak, we were doing 10,000 hires a month, so fantastic from a data perspective. I've recently doing a startup talent benchmarking to give TA leaders a external viewpoint of what's happening in the market, but more of that to come over the next few weeks.
Yeah, fantastic stuff. Jeremy, wonderful. Firstly, congratulations on launching this new product. Feel free to share the link into the chat, by the way. And something I think would be really interesting for the rest of the community to check out. But great commentary and contributions in the chat all the way through on that conversation. What are your thoughts on this generally? I mean, let's just take it to not just Reclo, but with regards to this advent of productivity that we expect that artificial intelligence is going to deliver to us. How do we then distribute the requirements? How do we factor in sort of the innovation that's constantly coming at us?
So I think, first of all, it's to understand what service is TA delivering. Is TA delivering a Virgin Atlantic first class, service, i.e. like yourself, hung, turn left at the top of them stairs? Or is it Ryanair, stack them high, sell them cheap? So first of all, you need to define the service that you're offering. Secondly, I think you need to look at the commercial impact. So as I put in the chat, how can TA evidence that the impact it's having on shareholder value? That way you will start to align with the CEO's views that his people are his most important asset. Then what I would tend to do is to look at your requisitions. Now, I'm a great believer in the 80-20 rule. 20% of people in the business deliver 80% of the value. So when you're looking at your requisitions, actually business value versus hiring complexity, start to understand where they sit on that matrix. Then,
all right, hold that thought. Don't go too fast for me, Jeremy. I'm slow-witted. So you got a grid, right?
Yeah.
Business. So hiring difficulty. We talk about hiring difficulty
versus hiring complexity, business value.
So business value, they're not the same. They're not necessarily. No. They could be, but they're not necessarily the same.
So what is the salary to revenue ratio of the role? I.e., with that role, how many times salary is the business expected that person to bring in? So sales is an easy one, right? Sales guy, you pay him 100K basic, he brings in £2 million revenue. So looking at the value to the business, then the complexity. Some recruiters will really enjoy working on high complex roles. Others will enjoy working on high volume roles where a recruiter can be working on 60 recs at any one time, but it's one skill set times 60. So it's an understanding of where you sit in that. Then going back to the 80-20 principle, what 20% of the recruitment process adds 80% of the value to that the process that TA is delivering? You need to understand in there, where do you need the value add? And that will generally dictate to you where the recruiter should be adding that value. The other part, that's where I believe you can bring in the AI. So into those areas. As I've said before, TA as an industry is not big enough for proper AI investment. However, there is AI investment in other sectors which have been pulled into TA, such as voice bots, note taking, etc., where you can start to leverage that value. I'm also a great believer that every single recruiter and TA function should have very clear KPIs. When your strategic global head of recruitment goes and sits down with your CPO, they should be able to articulate the value they're adding to the business, and this is how they've done it based on their annual KPIs. When you as a recruiter go into that room with your manager for your annual review, if you know what your KPIs are and you've hit every single one of them, you go in there feeling confident, feeling great because you know you're doing a great job. I believe that with that clarity, people can perform better. So from a KPI perspective, when I'm looking at teams, are teams carrying the right level of requisition? I'd be looking at declined offers, first month attrition, vacancy versus hires. How many of the vacancies that a recruiter works on have actually resulted in hires? Previous organization, we did some research and basically found that 70% of requisitions that didn't reach hiring went past interview stage. So all the work's been put in. So it's then really understanding when is that recruiter maximizing their bandwidth. So in some roles where it is high business value, high complexity, a recruiter might be working on 1 or 2 recs. Traditionally, the stuff that your exec search would look at, your internal exec team, right? Real high value, they might be working on 1 or 2 requisitions, versus the other end of the spectrum where the volume is there.
Yeah, dude, I really love that sort of calculation. The question is, how do we find that number out? I mean, it's one of these, like, it doesn't seem like it's a quick and easy way to do it. And I'm just worried that, Tia's sitting there thinking, this sounds great, Jeremy, but how am I meant to actually figure that out? Is there a very quick and easy way to do it? Or, do we need to invest the time? It seems to me you got to interview people and figure out exactly what the expectation is. Like,
get yourself a data scientist. Someone who can look at your historic data and properly analyze it and properly understand it and properly look at the productivity that a recruiter is delivering. Now, what I'm seeing in the tech space right now is within TA, we use tech to sort of monitor what we're doing. However, in other areas, the tech is beginning to dictate what that individual should do, i.e., what should a salesperson be doing to maximize their output? Salesforce, for example, will start to point them in direction. That's where TA tech needs to go to start to push the recruiters to be more productive. If you take your historic data, you can then start to map and understand what areas recruiters are good at. Then you can start to, on a general level, what I would say to people is look at your team, work out your average. And then is a recruiter delivering above or below that team average? And then start to set them goals based on that. So data and reporting is really simple till you've actually got to do it. Okay. So you need someone who can really understand, can really crunch your data, but also have a very clear data strategy. How are you measuring success? Because if you can't measure your own team's success, the CEO walks in the room and goes, I think TA is too big because I was chatting to a friend of mine over dinner last night and they've reduced their team by 40%. We're going to reduce ours by 30%. Opinion. No one's going to go head to head with the CEO. So unless you have the data to evidence where you are, what you've done. Now, with AI, we are going back into a snake oil sales environment. Everyone's got AI. A lot of the AI I've seen actually isn't any more sophisticated than what Daxtra were offering 15 years ago with their CV parsing technology. And going back to your earlier question, Hung, at my previous organization, we brought in an AI platform, and the whole business case for that AI platform was based upon headcount reduction. How many headcount will you take out to pay for that new platform? So I think this is where the recruiters need to start looking at TA as all of the other departments within an organization do. What is that shareholder value? What is that bottom line impact? I'll happily reduce my headcount by 30%. As long as I've then got I can then use that money to invest in technology. Don't try and hold on to headcount, because sometimes actually reducing headcount can be positive in a function.
Very interesting. You talk about business value. How do we calculate that? I mean, as you say, sales is easy, but certain jobs aren't, like developer, senior developer, like business value. How do we map that?
I think to answer that question, you can start to delve into the great stuff around the talent intelligence metrics. Toby Colshaw, absolute leader in that field. If you bring in this tech person, they can bring in this skill set that can then produce and build that product. That product is going to enable us. Or we've seen XYZ organizations start to hire this skill set. Why are they doing that? Those skill sets are showing that they have a product in the offering. For example, Dyson started to employ lots of automotive engineers. Guess what? Dyson were going to launch an electric car, so they scrapped it. So I think there's that value that you can articulate, as well as looking at the salary to revenue ratio. What is a salary to revenue? Now, and everyone talks about sales as the easy one to do, but sales can't perform unless they've got marketing, HR, IT, finance all behind them. So if a role isn't critical for an organization, then it shouldn't be hired, full stop. But one thing you can quite simplistically do is start to measure the cost of an empty seat, i.e. a business is only going to hire someone to add value to their business's bottom line. So whilst that rec is open, what is the value lost to the business's bottom line? Then as a TA leader, what buttons can you press, levers can you pull to accelerate that hiring? You accelerate that hiring, someone's in that seat sooner, or improve the quality of that hire. That way you can then start to evidence the value.
Very interesting. And in fact, that's that kind of negative view. And I don't mean negative as in morally negative, but looking at the cost of not actually filling that role. Maybe is that something we could do locally? I mean, all of this sounds like a massive project, right? But could we locally say to the hiring manager, what does it cost you if this job
So what I've done in the past is I've gone into organizations and I've started to look at some of their metrics. Then I've gone and actually knocked on finance's door and said to finance guys, can you help me out? I've done some very, very crude basic calculations. This is what I think the financial impact of TA is having. Now, finance really enjoy it. Finance, a little bit like Groundhog Day. I'm being a little bit sarcastic here, but they do the same thing year in, year out. You give them a fun project, they're like, oh, hold on one second. So what you're actually saying is that TA spent a £3 million budget, but actually TA is responsible for spending £200 million a year on salaries. And from that £200 million a year in salaries, we're expecting to get 3 times that back. So we're expecting 600 million. So if we improve our performance by, say, 10%, we can put an extra 60 million on the business bottom line. Get finance involved. Then you go out to the business as a TA and finance project. Put finance on it, and guess what? People start to listen. The CFO, unless you breadcrumb it, does the CFO understand the impact that TA has on a business, or does the CFO just look at your revenue? Then, once you know where the value is, then what AI tools can you start to pull in to do that? Then you can start to work out, actually, I no longer need 15 headcount. I can actually do a better job with 5 headcount, because my 5, I can have much, more senior individuals who only focus on this very small part of the role. But that part of the role is the 20% that adds 80% of the value. So it's all, it's all in the data.
Loads of interesting things you said, Jeremy, particularly like enrolling finance into the project. Like, don't try and pretend to be finance. You don't know how to do that, but come up with some crude thing that they will definitely improve and say, I'm trying to do this. Can you help? And people are saying in the chat, they're saying, actually, everyone loves the project. Everyone loves and
do it. Give it to finance, knowing that it's not quite correct. Because guess what? Finance will be even happier if they can find out, if they can get, they can correct what you've done. So it's really like, the way I look at it is, a lot of organizations try and become far too complex with their metrics. Does a 10-year-old understand the metrics? If a 10-year-old does not understand the metrics, do not use it. Do not use anything more complex than a bar chart, because unless a senior exec knows and understands and is comfortable to articulate that data, they will not do so in case they're challenged. So small baby steps. You've got to take the organization on a journey, and you need to take the leadership team on the journey, evidence to them the impact that TA can have, i.e. Mr. Hiring Manager, if your whole team was 20% more productive, what impact would that have on your personal bonus at the end of the year? Then that starts to create the measures.
There's an art and a science in navigating through these complicated businesses. Jeremy, your time at City has taught you some skills, mate. It's taught you some skills.
It was fun. I mean, we were very fortunate. At one point we were doing 10,000 hires a month. So from a data perspective, and it was a complex business. But yeah, it was some very slick operators over there at City, I'm telling you.
Yeah, fantastic. Jeremy, we obviously need to do a specific show, get you on a bit more time, because this has been fantastic sort of cameo that you put in. So thanks for joining at this late notice. However, we have to put it to a close right now because we're running well over time. So Jeremy Thornton, thank you so much for joining us. I will bring you back later on this year for more chat on this. I want to talk about enrolling finance into recruitment projects. And one of the critical things I think TA do need to do is to have a very clear ability, strengthen their ability to actually converse with C-level, because AI is going to make a big difference. But right now, I feel that the difference it's going to make is all about job cuts within the TA and HR function. Now, fair enough. I think some of that probably will happen. But, who determines what we do, the extra time, the extra productivity? Those things should be something that we're involved in. Okay, folks, Jeremy, I'm going to let you go. Talent benchmarking right there. Go check it out. New product coming out. Let's move on. We're going to be back next week, folks. Hope you enjoyed the show. If you have done, please do follow the channel on Crowdcast. We're doing this every week, and actually several intermediary times this week because I am traveling around, but I'm keeping the Friday rhythm going. But as I'm also touring, I'm going to do a Brainfood on Tour special as well. So 2 things happening next week. It's a double header. On Tuesday, I'm going to be in Pondicherry, I believe. And so I will be doing a how to hire in India in 2025. India special, folks. I'll be speaking to local recruiters here, getting them on screen, and then discussing what are the unique challenges of recruiting in this amazing, chaotic, fascinating country, how to hire in India. That's happening at 12 p.m. India IST time. So probably a bit earlier for the folks in Europe. but register for it anyway if you want to get the replay. And on Friday, we're going to crack on. We have got a fantastic show. Let me just check what that is. I think it is, we're going to be reviewing some stats. Let me just quickly check, but I do believe we have a report breakdown show for you. And it's going to be, yes, we do. We've got no other figure than John Strauss, founder of Greenhouse. He's going to come on and talk about their report that's about to be released, where they've surveyed CHROs and HR professionals on what they think the talent trends are going to be in 2025. Make sure you tune in for that. That's going to be fascinating data share, and also from someone who's deeply knowledgeable about the industry from both the recruiting and the product making side. Okay, folks, that's it. I got to go because there's a party and a cocktail waiting for me on the roof terrace. I will see you next week on Tuesday and Friday. Thanks for watching, everyone.